It's not going away, all right? It's not going away. Another state has declared an emergency over this fuel crisis, all right? Another state. And this also comes as we are being warned of weaponized food as well, right? And weaponized energy. So, is that what this is? Is that what's going on? Is this a weaponization of our food and fuel? Right? Sure seems like it. And the IMF is also warning us. And we are also seeing a massive rail strike on the horizon. Right? I know we've been hearing about it for a month or two, but it's getting worse. We thought it was over with. It's back now. All right, I'll give you details on that in just a second. And another state has declared a emergency over fuel, and another state has declared an emergency over something else to do with transportation and commerce, all right, and farming. So we're getting hit hard left and right, and this is not going away, right? This is not going away. So let's dive into what is happening, all right? Let's get into this rail strike here. So, rail strike threatens to escalate as a third union rejects the deal. So, last time I checked on this, there was only one union that was rejecting it out of 12. There's 12 unions, they all have to agree on the same thing, and there was only one rejecting it. Now we are seeing three rejected. So it's getting worse. That's what I mean. The rail strike is becoming more of a possibility every day, and this is something that could threaten billions of dollars in our US economy, all right? There's also rail strikes going on in the UK as well, right? So it's happening worldwide, and it's one of these things. I understand people's gripes about their working conditions, but at the same time, these strikes almost seem orchestrated. These labor unions almost seem coordinated and acting all at the same time all around the world. There's massive strikes all over the world. Strikes in France at the oil refineries, strikes in the UK for their nurses, medical system. There's nurse strikes here in the US. There's railroad strikes. All these different strikes are hitting at the same time, and they're in critical sectors as well. All right, there was Amazon strikes, all these different strikes going on. So it says the International Brotherhood of Boilermakers announced Monday its members voted against ratifying a tentative agreement with the major freight railroad, making IBB the third labor group to turn down the deal brokered by the Biden administration and upping the chances of a nationwide strike, right? Union rail workers opposed to the tentative agreement negotiated by Biden's Presidential Energy Board are unhappy that the deal did not make more to address quality of life issues, particularly a lack of sick time and working on skeleton crews. Multiple union members told the paper that they are frustrated that their union representatives signed off on the PEB's recommendations back in September, arguing the agreement did not do enough to improve working conditions. So they're saying that they didn't even really agree to the previous agreement in September, all right? And there was only one that was opposing it at first. Now there's three. So that could be true. Maybe it was true, and they just didn't know. And once they saw what the deal actually was, they backed out. It says all 12 unions involved in the negotiations must agree to ratify their new contracts, or a strike could take place, devastating supply chains and the economy at large, costing an estimated $2 billion a day. Congress is expected to get involved if a work stoppage is triggered, but multiple unions have agreed to continue negotiating into early December. All right, so this is just a thing that's looming in the background, and I get people have real gripes, but I feel like it's one of these things they want to have to pull the card out if they need it. All right, if they really need it, they can pull this card out and stop the railroads at any moment, right? But Congress would get involved, and they would probably force them to do something. But you can only force people to do so much, right? Before they just don't show up to work. It's one of those things. Congress can say, show up to work, but it's if they don't want to, they're not going to. All right, so just another thing that we were facing. And the IMF director is also giving us a major warning. All right. And we'll get to this weaponized food and this diesel emergency in just a second too. But these are all interconnected, right? This is all our supply chain, our monetary system, our economic system. This is all interconnected, and we are moving towards a honestly collapse scenario with it, right? And the IMF is even saying this. It says, the managing director of the IMF urged global policymakers to prevent inflation from becoming a, quote, runaway train at the time of extraordinary global economic turmoil, right? And it's one of these things, we think it's bad with 8% inflation, which these are cooked numbers, 7%. Cookbook numbers anyways, the number is probably way higher than, it's probably 20 or 30%. But we think that's bad. There's other countries that are in complete turmoil right now. They're in complete chaos. Argentina, 100% inflation right now. 100% inflation. Can you even imagine that? And their interest rates have to keep up with their inflation rate. So their interest rates are heading towards 100% as well. So nobody can even lend. It's just one of these situations. There's no growth and ton of inflation. Nothing's being produced. Nobody even knows what anything costs because the price is going up so fast, right? So they're saying, quote, a runaway train. That's already happening in tons of countries. It's just happening slower in the West, but it's still happening, and it's going to keep happening most likely for a while. There was this celebration that inflation slightly didn't go up as high as it was supposed to be. It was supposed to go up like 0.6% and only went up 0.4%, I believe. And there was this big celebration and stock rally that it only went up 0.4% instead of 0.6% inflation. And it's still up like 7.7% from last year for October. So it's one of these things. It's already bad in other places, and it's going to get worse in the West and the United States. It says, speaking to reporters, the IMF said the world's economy, quote, has been hit by one shock after another. All right, and they were saying all the things. You know what it is. You know all the shocks we've been getting hit with. But reigning and rising prices could take priority, she said. Quote, if we do not restore price stability, we will undermine prospects for growth, she said, adding, quote, we cannot possibly allow inflation to become a runaway train. Bad for growth, bad for people, bad especially for poor people. Wow. I mean, where was the IMF past 2 years telling everyone this? Past 2 or 3 years now going on, telling everyone that this was coming, this was happening, right? Where were they saying, this is going to be bad for growth, bad for people, and bad for poor people? Like, where were they? Everyone knows this, but for some reason, all the geniuses that are our leaders just, they didn't believe this, all right? And now the IMF, Argentina has an IMF deal. That's why they have to raise their interest rates to 100%, because they have this crazy IMF deal to whatever the inflation is, they have to raise their interest rates to. And they're stuck, right? This is what's happening. Bad for growth, bad for people, and really bad for poor people. That's what's happening in Argentina and the US and the West right now. She said, quote, when monetary policy puts a foot on the brakes, fiscal policy should not step on the accelerator. That is true. It's exactly what they're doing, is just printing more money, creating more inflation, but also raising interest rates at the same time, and it just doesn't work. And real quick, I just wanted to talk about what the IMF even does, all right? Because this is all interconnected. This is why we're seeing diesel emergencies, gas prices so high, and food and energy being used as a weapon, because it's unaffordable. Of course you can use it as a weapon, the things that people need most, when there's scarcity and there's price inflation and manipulation, right? So it says the IMF functions as a co-op that is funded by, governed by, and accountable to its 190 member countries. And it says the U.S. is the largest contributor to and shareholder in the fund. Treasury Department leads the U.S. engagement in the IMF, with the Secretary of Treasury serving as the U.S. governor to the IMF. And it also says, based in Washington, D.C., the IMF receives funds called quota subscriptions from its 190 members. Members pay according to the size of their economy, with voting rights based on each member's quota. Special drawing rights are the IMF units of account, and the SDR is valued based on a basket of 5 currencies: the US dollar, the euro, the Japanese yen, the Chinese yuan, and the British pound. The IMF manages an allocation of about $650 billion USD. All right, so just to give you a background on what the IMF actually is, it's a conglomerate of all these countries coming together and essentially forming a world bank, and they give out these crazy loans to all these countries that are struggling, that use their currencies as reserve currencies already. You know what I mean? It's one of these things, it's weird, strange. It's this international bank, right? And it's based in Washington, D.C. It's kind of like, and it says the U.S. is the biggest contributor to it. It's kind of like another Fed. It's like an international Federal Reserve that the U.S. kind of controls and manipulates and has a lot of say over, right? It's just weird. Just this globalist world government's already set up around us. It's already set up. It's already normalized. You think the IMF's normal. The UN's normal. It's also under the UN as well. It's a project under the United Nations. But it's all normal. It's normal. We've had this stuff for 50, 60, 70 years. It's normal to have the IMF, the United Nations, to have these world government bodies. It's normal. And what she was saying is right, though, right? That's the thing. They kind of implement the crisis, but then they come out after and say, hey, like, you should have done this. You should be doing this. I mean, yeah, obviously, you should have done this 2 years ago, all right? So just to remind everyone, since January 2020, the United States has printed almost 80% of all U.S. dollars that exist, according to some sources. To appreciate the scale of the Federal Reserve money printing, you need to look back all the way 24 months. All right, so I think this was an article out of CNN. They were saying up to 80% of all the U.S. dollars that exist, right, like actual dollars, have been printed since January 2020. And this is a big reason why we're seeing what we're seeing. We're also seeing energy markets being manipulated, which affect everything. Diesel is used in the ship. It's used in the tractor. It's used in the truck. It's used in the combine. It's used in the planes. It's used in everything, right? Everything to get your product. Petroleum is used to make plastics and all these different synthetic materials that we didn't have 100 years ago, okay? All these things are petroleum based, and it's all related to energy prices going up. It's all going to be affected. Every single thing we touch is going to be affected. If there's shortages on energy and gas prices go up, energy prices go up. So let's get into this warning that food and energy is going to be weaponized, right? So the Chinese president is coming out and saying that food and energy is being weaponized and will be weaponized, right? Very just dystopian to hear this from a world leader, but it's true. It's true. This is 100% true. It says, Z referenced global issues and rocky geopolitical relations that stem from the conflict, like global food scarcity and energy shortages, during an address on Tuesday. Z claimed that food and energy security were, quote, the most pressing challenges facing the global community, but argued it is a problem caused by Western responses to Russia's invasion. All right, so he's saying it's the West putting these embargoes and these sanctions on is what is causing problems in the international markets, and it's kind of true. Is that not true? It's kind of true. All right, OPEC is also now reducing capacity, which is starting to affect it too. They weren't at first, but now they are also reducing capacity. and reducing supply, which is going to increase the price. So it says, quote, the source of the current crisis is not from production and demand, but a supply chain problem. International cooperation has been disturbed, Z said. Quote, food and energy problems should not be politicized, utilized, and weaponized. Food and energy problems should not be politicized, utilized, and weaponized. I mean, to be fair, I agree with what he's saying, but China has weaponized their supply chain completely over the past 2 years. They have used all of these lockdowns and stuff to manipulate the supply chain and to keep this thing going where they can just lock down whatever city, lock down whatever port, shut down the Apple factories, shut down the Tesla factories, affect any American company at any moment by shutting down their factories, all right? And a lot of companies are getting out of China because of this, because it hasn't ended, all right? It's only gotten worse. So he's right, right? Food and energy problems should not be politicized, utilized, and weaponized, but China's doing it, Russia's doing it, and the U.S. is doing it with sanctions. Russia's doing it with food, blocking grain exports. The U.S. is doing it with oil and energy by implementing embargoes and sanctions. They're going to implement this massive embargo on December 5th on oil, on all Russian oil. They're not going to be able to get insurance. They're not going to be able to port at any European ports. And this is going to rock the markets, right? They are already preparing a secretive fleet for this event, Russia is, so they can still transport oil, and they're preparing to have secret oil transports in the middle of the ocean to different ships that are untraceable, right? This is crazy. This is a war, guys. We're in the middle of a war, and he's right. These things are being weaponized, all right? So he also said, quote, unilateral sanctions and limitations related to tech corporations should be dropped. Quote, developed economies should reduce the negative spillover effects of their monetary policy adjustments and stabilize debts at a sustainable level, right? So that's true too. Should reduce the negative spillover effects of their monetary policy adjustments and stabilize debt. Because what did this IMF had just warned of that we were talking about? They are saying that we are in this economic crisis where we have this inflation, and all we can really do is raise interest rates and manipulate the markets that way to crash the markets, crash the economy. But that still doesn't solve the problem of the shortages, of the energy shortages that are driving everything, driving all the prices higher, making all of this worse. It doesn't, they always just do some little thing that doesn't fix the root problem, right? If they really wanted to fix this, the U.S. would come out and say, we are approving all new oil drilling leases in the U.S., foreign, domestic. Come on over to the U.S. Any foreign investments in oil, we will support this and we will approve your permit for it, right? That's what the U.S. would say if they were serious about this. And we would just have all the foreign investors come here, and we would have all the domestic companies expand, right? Because Biden's been shutting down these oil leases one by one. There's a basin in Texas that accounts for 40% of the U.S. oil production that they're trying to shut down because it apparently has too much ozone, right? Too much ozone in it. That's what they're saying. But if they were serious, they would just ramp up production, and that would just make oil prices down naturally. They would just crash anyways, and then Russia wouldn't be able to fund this war. They wouldn't be able to fund their economy if oil bottomed out. That's all it would take. I'm just saying, if they were serious about this, and it wasn't about creating a economic crisis, a energy crisis, and using this situation as exploitation to implement their agenda, if they weren't doing all that, if they were serious, they could just crush the oil markets, crush OPEC, U.S. has a ton of oil, a ton of natural gas. We could be the biggest in the world. We are the biggest in the world, but we could act like the biggest in the world and go in on this. All right. So that's the solution. Z's right. Food, energy are being weaponized, but China is also guilty of this as well as manipulating the supply chains as well, because he's saying this, it's a supply chain problem. It's not a production problem, which is true. There are some production issues, but we produce a mass amount of food, a mass amount of goods, a mass amount of oil, ton of oil in the ground. We could drill it all day, but all these bottlenecks are being put on for no reason. So that is true, but China is also guilty. Russia is guilty of blocking grains, and the U.S. is guilty of blocking oil. So everyone's guilty here. Everyone's exacerbating and making the problem worse. Because honestly, they're all on the same side. It's just like in World War II. All right. After World War II, it's a little dicey here, but this is all true. Right? I just don't know how to talk about this on YouTube. But this is 100% true. I think it's called Operation Paperclip. Pretty sure that's what it's called. The U.S. took a bunch of these German scientists that, and you know who they are, and they took them to the U.S. to have all of these secret experiments, and they made them the head of all of these science experiments, right? And their nuclear programs and all this stuff. They took all these German scientists, right, during World War II. You know what was going on over there. And after everything, they brought them all over, funded them, and gave them a promotion. You know what I mean? I'm just saying, both sides of wars are funded. Both sides are funded. Both sides could want war. Both sides could be in on it, right? I really don't trust anyone in any of this, right? Honestly, I don't trust the U.S. I trust the U.S. because I live here, right? But the U.S. is implementing agendas that are not beneficial to us. Russia is doing things too, right? We got to be real here. Russia's instigating too. Like, come on. NATO's doing ton of instigating, and so is China. China's shutting us down the supply chain. China's getting ready. Z was telling their military prepare for war. All right. I really don't trust anyone. Right? I don't trust anyone. I love America. I'm an American. I live in America. But I'm just saying, in this war space, it's so sketchy, right? And every side is manipulating the food and supply chain and the energy supply chain and making it worse for us, right? That's what I see, is everyone's making it worse for us. That's all I'm seeing right now. So let's get into this, all right? Big news, another state has declared a diesel emergency. That's why this is all interconnected. That's why this is all connected. Another state has declared. That's why I wanted to talk about Z saying food and fuel is being weaponized. And we are seeing real effects. I talked about a few days ago, last week, how Nebraska and South Dakota have declared emergencies over the diesel fuel supply chain in their states, right? Now another state has declared an emergency, and another state is declaring an emergency for a drought. So it's crazy, guys, and we are going to see state after state declare these emergencies. It's going to affect the rural states first. I was saying it's going to affect the middle rural states first, and this is true. This is true. Another middle rural state declaring an emergency over this, because the shipments are coming on all the coast, and it's all getting siphoned out, and they're getting the crumbs, right? They're getting the last bits. They're going to feel the shortages first, right? So Iowa has declared an emergency as well. So Nebraska and South Dakota did last week. That's what I was talking about. But now Iowa, so here's the article. Iowa, like neighboring states Nebraska and South Dakota, had issued an emergency due to fuel conditions within the state. Another border state, Missouri, has a waiver in place through December 1st for hay haulers due to drought conditions. It's happening, guys. The emergency in Iowa notes high demand for petroleum products throughout the Midwest has created, quote, extensive challenges to timely access to supplies of motor fuels. This is what the emergency order in Iowa says. This is serious, guys. This is spreading. So, quote, extensive challenges to timely access to supplies of motor fuels. The diesel supply chain is breaking down, right? And this is in winter as well. I mean, there's more people are using energy consumptions running their heat, but a lot of farmers aren't running their tractors right now. A lot of farmers aren't even using diesel, right? There's a whole sector of the economy. Some of them still are. I know there's crops that are grown in the winter. Southern states are still growing, but a giant portion of the diesel economy isn't even using diesel right now. And there's still, especially in Iowa and Nebraska and South, there's probably feet of snow on the ground in Iowa right now, right? Their corn harvest is over. They were harvesting last month, the month before. It's probably getting snowy and really cold. It's really cold here. Foot of snow on the ground in Colorado. And it's probably getting really cold in Iowa, Nebraska, South Dakota. So they're not even farming. So a whole sector is being taken out, and they're still having diesel shortages, all right? This is huge. So, quote, extensive challenges to timely access to supplies of motor fuels. It says, in addition, drivers transporting motor fuels are experiencing long wait times at terminals, making it difficult for transporters to meet demand and comply with state and federal hours of service requirements. So they're essentially doing what Nebraska and South Dakota did. They're waiving the hour requirements. They can only work, so many hours in a day, whatever, 10 hours, 12 hours, 14 hours a day. Different states. I know there's federal rules too. All that stuff. There's all these federal state requirements that they have on them, truckers do, just to transport their load, right? They're dealing with all this other stuff too. They're trying to get to you as fast as they can to get this load off so they can get off work or go to a different job. And they face all these like regulations, how long they can drive and all these other things. So they are waiving it in Iowa for them so they can get the fuel to its destination in time, right? Because they're having shortages and they need these trucks to get there. They can't have the truck sitting overnight for 12 hours for its time limit thing, right? And just wait. You know what I mean? They can't have that. They need the trucks going. They need the fuel to get there. That's how bad it's getting. And Nebraska, South Dakota did the same thing, all right? And it's good for these states. It'll help these states a little, but it's not solving the bigger issue. The bigger issue is that we are not producing enough diesel and petroleum and crude that the world needs. We're not producing it. We're not producing what the world needs right now. That's the problem. And that's the solution. Just produce more and stop. And I keep saying it, but it's just insane. This embargo, this December 5th oil embargo, it's going to make it way worse. Look for way more states to declare these types of emergencies very soon. And it's not being reported in the news. I have to scrape to find these different states that are declaring it. It's not in any news because they're trying to hide it. They're trying to say there's no diesel shortage. There's no fuel shortage. Nothing. That's what they're trying to say. They're trying to hide it. I have to scrape for these emergency orders for 3 different states in the country, right? For diesel fuel. You have to scrape to find these articles anywhere, right? So look for more states. December 5th is coming up before we know it. And the panic and the shortages are gonna hit before December 5th. All right, it's just how it's gonna work. Once we get a week away, it's probably really gonna hit. And oil markets, trading, all this stuff is really gonna go haywire. All right, so get prepared now, guys. Don't forget that you could be out of fuel. Like your generator could be out of fuel. You need to have your like little gas tanks filled up, all right? I'm kind of talking to myself right now. I just remembered this. I need to fill up my gas tanks for my generator because I use them, because I was using my generator recently, just running it, charging batteries and stuff with it, testing it out. And you need to keep this fuel stocked up. This could be critical life-saving fuel. I went to the gas station the other day. This was a small local gas station in the mountains, but still, all the pumps, 4 pumps, have the yellow tape on it. I showed a video of it the other day, and there was no gas at any of the pumps. All right, so make sure you're stocked up on your gas, on your food. X's saying, China's warning, food and fuel are going to be weaponized, and they are being weaponized, and it's true. All right, so thank you guys for watching. Have a blessed day.